Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We're a week removed from Andor Season 2, the finale. Who has watched Rogue One since finishing Andor? I did, and I honestly thought it changed. Andor changed a few scenes in how I saw Rogue One. Didn't change the whole movie, but some scenes I think it gave some additional weight to. But what are we here today making a video for? Well, if you're someone who hasn't really gotten into Star Wars books, but loved Andor and enjoys Rogue One, well, I have some book recommendations for you that connect in their different ways to Andor, but also Rogue One. So a great starting off point, I think, is the book Catalyst by James Luceno, and very much on the cover, titled as a Rogue One novel. Now, this book is centered around Director Krennic being put in charge to an extent of the Death Star project, still with some somewhat oversight by Grand Moff Tarkin, and in which Krennic knows he needs Galen Erso for his energy research for the super laser. But the book starts off with Galen, Lyra, and Jyn being kidnapped by people that were previously part of the Separatist movement during the Clone Wars. During the book, you learn the extent that Galen needs Lyra, his wife, to help him take notes, put together all his thoughts and ideas. But Lyra is very obviously skeptical of Director Krennic, and I think that very much leads into the opening scene of Rogue One, where Krennic calls Lyra troublesome as ever, and you really get an idea and sense where all that comes from. And like, Galen very much believes, to a point, everything Krennic is telling him of this energy research he does is for the betterment of the Empire and for everyone. But Lyra really unravels all those lies from Krennic. And then towards the end of the book, you get Saw Gerrera involved to rescue them, which obviously that leads into Rogue One and why they call Saw when Director Krennic turns up to take them back into the Empire, because obviously Krennic thinks he needs Galen's help completing the Death Star, and specifically the super laser. So I think this book is superb, especially if you love Rogue One. Like, I remember reading this years ago, obviously before we had any Andor, and I think that really links in to what we've seen in Season 2 with the director and Gorman and everything they're willing to do. I really do think that is a great starting point for if you love Andor and Rogue One. And then as your second read, I would go Rebel Rising. I really do think pacing-wise that would be fantastic to do, as you've just gotten a little bit in Catalyst of very, very young Jyn. And then, you know how that connects into Rogue One? You know Jyn is obviously saved to a point by Saw Gerrera, and so this book is picking up after that of Jyn being raised by the partisans, by Saw Gerrera to a point, becoming Saw's greatest warrior, which he references in Rogue One, of why he leaves her behind, of some of the partisans were realizing who she was, and very much this book is set around Jyn learning who within this group she can actually trust, because there is a moment where that trust is shattered, that trust is broken, and very much, I think, a really good young adult Star Wars novel to go along with Jyn, and like, I think really delves into some of the adult tones of Rogue One and Andor, and really fits in really well, even though it's centered around a teenage Jyn Erso. So the next book I would go, and this one is getting into the super heavy, super political, super adult themes of Star Wars that connects really well with Andor and Rogue One, but setting place before all this, before Andor, is The Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear. Now, this book is structured and centered around Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera. Almost butchered his name just then. But virtually, probably the first half to 75% of this book, every chapter is either centered around Saw Gerrera, Mon, or Bail. And so even though Mon and Bail, some of their story at the beginning, their stories kind of lap over in them obviously dealing with each other. When the chapter changes, it changes perspective. So I think it's really cool and interesting. But during this book, you have Mon Mothma, who is trying to gather a group, as many senators as she can, to put forward a bill in the Imperial Senate to kind of minimize Palpatine's powers. Obviously, that's not going to go too well for anyone. Obviously, us knowing where things go in the future, but that story of how that takes place and what she has to do, and like ISB get involved. ISB, like, they reference torturing Mon after episode 3 in between episode 3 and episode 4 of torturing Mon over the 2000 senators that Bail, Mon, and Padme were trying to put together near the end of the Clone Wars. But then also, like, Mon gets taken again by the ISB and virtually interrogated, tortured all over again. And some of those scenes are quite difficult to read through. But if you ever have any questions on what Mon goes through for the rebellion, what her life has been like this solidifies that story. Then you have Bail, where his side of this book is he thinks a way to turn the people of the Empire against Palpatine and his government is to find evidence that Palpatine and his government were lying about the Jedi trying to overthrow the Republic and virtually arrest or murder Palpatine, and thinks he knows how to find that evidence. And so he goes off on a long mission for majority of this book, which then ties into him running in to Saw Gerrera and his partisans, and a particular partisan in Saw's group being a previous member of the Separatists, and how all that links in together. And the ending of this book really gives you a sense of this taking place before any rebellion movement of any form of Mon financing Luthen or anything like that. And so I think this is a very adult book for Star Wars books, Star Wars literature in general. But if you love that type of storytelling in Star Wars, I really do think this is a definite recommend. It is a thick book. I, for one, when I got an early review copy late last year, I had to read it and it took me so long. But then when the audiobook came out, I read that again through the audiobook, and it took me like a quarter of the time. But I really do think the audiobook is the best way to read this book, especially if you're an audio person, or like you can go either way. I really do think that is the best way to experience this book, because there's a few moments between Mon and Bail, and you really learn that Padme perhaps was the bridge that kept them together and their friendship, and helped them work together as senators in their profession. Now, the fourth and final book I would recommend come with recommendations, or if you like particular things, is that this book doesn't necessarily connect to Andor and Rogue One, but has those very adult themes, because this book, The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. This book one, the author is a historian in the real world, but the book is also being told from the perspective of a in-universe, Star Wars universe historian after the sequel trilogy. So it's which there is a historian, the First Order and all that comes along, he joins up, he fights, he then after episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, he starts documenting everything he can find of how the rise of Palpatine, the rise of the Empire, how it happened, the events that led to it, of the Republic, of the Clone Wars, and then what happens during the days of the Empire, and how certain things happen, and certain organizations get created, do the awful atrocities to the people of the Empire, and then how stuff with the First Order and everything like that. And I think it is very much, at times, it can be a boring book, because obviously it is being written from the perspective of an in-universe historian. So it reads like a book, a text you would be given if you were in university and you were studying some form of history in time. Like, the book isn't being written for entertainment purposes. Like, it's very structured in that way, and which I think that leads into how fantastic it is and a really different perspective of Star Wars. Like, how we all talk about how Andor is a really different take on Star Wars and an adult tone, and I think it's taking that same way of thinking in a Star Wars book to be different at the same time. So again, the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire. So yeah, those would be my 4 books if you loved Andor and Rogue One. And I don't think we're ever getting anything similar to that in Star Wars. If ever, most likely for an extremely long period of time. So if you're going to miss that type of content for Star Wars, I really do think go out, get yourself a physical book, get an ebook, get an audiobook, and really experience the extra layer of these characters and the things that connect or can remind you of this show that perhaps can push that love of adult-themed Star Wars that much further. Let me know what you think. Have you read these books? Would these be books you would recommend for someone who's seeking more Andor and Rogue One vibes, feelings, depressing adult storytelling in Star Wars to remind us of the bombshell of a world we live in the year of our Lord 2025? But let me know what you think. If you liked the video, please hit like, subscribe. We keep on growing. We're getting there, guys. Thank you for anyone else that is new to the channel. Love yous all. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you.